in him. But now I must discover that completeness that's already done, because he finished it on the cross. He resurrected from the dead, and he said, kindred and carried kindred. It gives me great pleasure and honor to be elected. Come, the flame of God. He's preparing us to be the fire of God, because Hebrews says, there's a joy in the journey. I'm excited about what God is doing, and I'm excited about being with you. Tonight we're going to be on the mountaintop, and we'll talk about the mountaintop experience. In the episode before, which was 1 and 2, we're on episode 3, and we're going to talk about the mountaintop experience, my greatest concern. In the first series, we talked about the wait is over. And the wait is over because the priesthood has changed. And we begin to realize that we must go beyond 66 moving forward. And moving forward is literally, we're saying that after I graduated school, I began to move forward. And one of the things that happened is that I was on a mountaintop in South Vietnam when Martin was assassinated. And I later asked the Lord, why was I in Vietnam? And the Lord said to me that I have preserved you. And my question was, you have preserved me. Now, I was very concerned because I had promised God that at age 12 that I would give my life to bring an adjustment to what I believed that was the racial divide. Remember, my life was, I was raised on a farm, and literally that's all that I knew. That's all that I was accustomed to. I was accustomed to, early in the morning, fatback meat, molasses, and for breakfast, and that's the way I was raised up. The break of the day was at 5 o'clock in the morning, and at 5 o'clock in the morning, we were out feeding the chickens, the hogs, and collecting the eggs. All this was done before breakfast. And approximately 6 o'clock in the morning is most of the time when we ate breakfast. And by 7 o'clock, we was rounding up the mules to be able to go to the fields and plow. And from 7 o'clock in the morning until noon. We normally broke at noon, and from noon to 1 o'clock was our lunch time. And most of the time after we ate, we actually went to sleep up under the oak tree until it was time to go back to work. Now, one of the things that you have to understand in that day, that it was time that we was going to school, but you have to understand, as far as we were concerned and my father was concerned, that school was secondary. And some days we went to school and some days we did not. So we had sporadic times that we went to school. I was not interested primarily in education because during that time, as far as my father was concerned, that sports was a waste of time if it was in the daytime or in the week time when we were supposed to have been making progress of him making money. If it was in the weekday, then as far as he was concerned, we needed to be working. On Saturdays was time that we peddled food in the streets, and or I was sitting on the city market selling vegetables. Now, as we grew up, we actually grew vegetables, one to eat, but the other to sell, and that was part of our lives. What was happening is that why was I in Raleigh, or why was I not? In Raleigh was a concern of mine because of the racial division. I really wanted to be there, I thought. And I asked, why was I in Vietnam? when Martin was assassinated. This was, in fact, to me, as a missed opportunity to give my life for the cause. Because remember, at 12 years old, I had asked God to give me wisdom, knowledge, and understand, and God's reply was, I have preserved you. So that baffled me because I was wondering, if you have preserved me, then why am I not doing what you have preserved me to do? I have always believed that you could ask God for anything and he would tell you. And I realized that for me, God has always talked to me. Now watch this. At 8 years of age, God gave me a message to give to my sister, and I gave the message and went on back to play. I did not realize that that's the way God was communicating to me. Now looking back over my life, and you can do the same thing. If you'll look back over your life, you'll come to find out that God has been speaking to you. God has been trying to communicate with you, but nobody has told you or called you to understand how to hear God. Now, I can see that God's hand was on my life all of my life. And when you look back over your life, you may be able to assess the same. Now, when I left Vietnam in 1969, I returned from Vietnam to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the 82nd Airborne Division, 3rd Brigade. And while we were there, I really learned something about serving the military in, quote, garrison. It was required that we would make a parachute jump at least every 3 months to maintain our jump status and for pay purposes. We were deployed to Washington, D.C. for a riot control mission in the wake of the riots in 1969. We slept on the airstrips up in D.C., and for several days, we actually slept in the halls of the Pentagon. But little did I know that God was preparing me. It was a life training mission that later I would understand that God was taking me through a process of bringing me into an understanding of why I was preserved. Upon returning to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, I was absolutely making plans to get out of the military because I did not see a future there. But because my first sergeant needed somebody to go to school, he chose me to go to Nuclear Biological Radiological School, back then, NBC School. And I graduated in the top 10, and I graduated with honors. I was a Sergeant E5 at that time because I got my promotions while we were in combat based on my performance. The first sergeant brought me into his office and he asked me the question. He says, how can you graduate a nuclear biological school with an 82 GT? And basically I said, well, when I took the test, I really didn't know what it was. I took part of the test and guessed the rest. And he instructed me to go back to the education center, retake my general aptitude test, and I did, and I scored high enough to go to non-commissioned officer school. So he actually sent me to the 82nd non-commissioned officer school, and I began to understand that I was called to leadership, and I already had the rank, but didn't understand what a leader was. And that time I began to be developed as a leader in non-commissioned officer, and that was based on performance. I could do the job, but I didn't understand that. So what I did is I decided that I would stay because I was finding myself enjoying learning. I re-enlisted, got married, went to the Panama Canal Zone where I was with the 193rd Infantry Brigade, Mountain Gators, and I really excited about being there. And being there, I saw and understood that it was excellent to be able to work in that field. I was excited about that. I worked with the battalion headquarters as the battalion non-commissioned officer that was in charge of nuclear radiological monitoring. And when I left that unit, I was given the Iron Mike statue. Now you have to understand, back in that day, to get that Iron Mike statue, it was presented to the best. So I felt like that I had reached a place that I was in the runnings for the best. But while I was in airborne school and when I went on leave, I ran into some people that was talking about being an airborne instructor, which became a desire of mine. And so when I was reassigned to Fort Benning, Georgia, and one of the things they said to me is go find a job. And I didn't know that was even in the mindset of the military. So I went to the airborne department and I asked for a job. And here's what the sergeant major said to me. At that time, I had a pride in my mustache that took me 20 years to grow. I was excited about the afro that he said you need to cut. But whatever I needed to do, I wanted to be an airborne instructor because that was my dream. And I saw my dream was about to come true, and I was about to become an airborne instructor, black hat. I was excited about that, and that became the highlight of my career. And I was privileged to train one of the female airborne instructors at that time. In 1978, I was reassigned to the 8th Army NCO Academy, where I was a training instructor in that academy. I also remember that I had a platoon, which was the first platoon, that was excited because they understood that I wanted to train them to be the best. And my slogan at that time was, we won't stop until we reach the top. And that was my motto, and I literally was trying to make sure that everyone that I encountered was going to become the best that I could cause them to become. Now, whenever I left there, I was given a plaque. And here's the plaque that I was given when I left Korea. And they literally gave me this plaque. And one of the things that I said to them is that I want you to take and remember this date and remember what I have done, because I want you to remember my name, because according to this that I was given in 1978, I still have it because I told them that you're going to hear my name again. What did that mean? That means that back even in 1978, I had a vision of the Lord. And the vision was that I saw in Korea that God was bringing me into an understanding, that he was developing me into becoming a leader, and that he was causing me to understand that I always can remember that class, first platoon, and they presented me that trophy and that plaque, and what it said inscribed on it was this: the man at the top, long may he remain. And I declare to you that from this day to that day to this day, I have kept that in the forefront of my mind. And like I said, I instructed them, write my name down. Someday or somewhere, you're going to hear the name again. Why? It's because God was taking me into a place that at that point, he was beginning to develop my life. And little did I know that upon leaving Korea, that I was going to a place that God was going to cause me to experience him in a very unique way. Now, I'm going to bring this to a close because I don't want to mix my conversion and my going forth in the Lord with what I just talked to you about my military career. I wanted to bring you into the understanding that there must be a balance between your natural life and your spiritual life, and you have to grow into a balance, because once you start discovering what you was born to do, you're going to come to realize that you must go beyond your graduation days. You must go beyond your natural days. It could be military, it could be a business, but still it's developing you to come into the place that God has called you to be prepared for. In December 1978 was a new beginning of my life, and I'll close with this. It says, I was baptized in liquid love, and God calls me to be able to see part of what he had preserved me for.